Thank you so much, Brad. Thanks to the band. You guys are doing really great work for us. We appreciate that every week we know we're going to hear some really fine music. You guys know that song that by Steve Winwood, Higher Love. He recorded it in 1986. He won a Grammy for it. And even though it's an old song, we're still hearing it these days. I just heard it on TV the other day behind an advertisement for Ford Motor Company. So they're co-opting that song like we are. But here's another interesting thing about it. It was written by a guy named Will Jennings, who is the son of a Methodist minister. And Will said he grew up going to church, Bible studies, hymn singings, all that stuff, and he decided that Higher Love is a hymn for our time. So just a little bit of music trivia for you there. Well, lately I've been reading a lot of blogs and articles that give really good advice about accepting your own imperfections. We really are pretty hard on ourselves sometimes, and some people are hard on themselves all the time, unfortunately. There's a range of things that we feel inadequate about: our appearance, our experiences, our achievements, our performances. Learning self-acceptance is an important topic, and there are a lot of people doing really good work on that. Well, part B of that is learning to accept, well, the imperfections in the rest of life. True well-being is available to everyone who's willing to accept imperfections not only in themselves, but also in their neighbors, their family, their friends, systems of government and church and business, and the wait staff in your socially distanced restaurant dining room. There's imperfections everywhere. Now, something you might be surprised about is that there are also imperfections in instruction manuals. You know what I'm talking about. Those little pieces of paper that are folded up 10, 12 times. They're printed on back and front in more than one language. And they're stuck in the box of that thing that you're supposed to be able to put together by following the instructions. Well, I have actually found imperfections there. Yep, I'm not kidding. Thank goodness for YouTube. You can turn that thing on and watch somebody else put it together, and maybe they understood the instructions a little better than you. But you know what? I'm not going to give up totally on all written instructions, because some of them are really thorough, like this. A bottle of dog shampoo has this: dog shampoo instructions for use. Remember to eliminate all escape routes in advance. Once your pet is slippery and wet, he or she will be smarter and faster than you. Okay, and here's another one. Instructions for putting together your new home office desk. There's an interesting side step. Make nachos. It's optional, but recommended. I like that one. It's really great to know that there's plenty of help for us out there in this imperfect world. It's true, isn't it? We have to accept imperfections in the world, or else we're going to be constantly stressed and anxious. You've learned recently now that from Tom and Linda that sometimes we need to dig just a little bit deeper. We need to, as I like to say, stretch the corners of our language to get a fuller meaning of what we're talking about, words we're speaking, like acceptance. I just said we have to accept imperfections. A little bit later, I'm going to draw that out just a bit more, but for now, maybe just take it at face value. How does it feel to hear someone say, accept imperfections? Kind of depends on who's saying it, right? If you like me or you like what we're talking about, it's easier to accept. So that's something to factor in. But if your feelings about the very idea of accepting imperfections, they might be affected by your personality, then that's going to make it harder for you, or easier, depending on your personality type. And that too is something to factor in as we consider all this. So we can go on and on with caveats about the idea of accepting imperfections. But for now, I'm just going to ask us to slow down a minute and think big picture. It's been a long time since we took a Kairos moment together. So in a way, that's what I'm going to suggest. For just a minute, let's reflect on some helpful thoughts that will remind us of the universal reality of imperfections and, more importantly, our capacity to accept them. So I invite you now just to relax a minute. You're going to see some beautiful trees. And let's just try to take these thoughts in. Accepting imperfections is a way to have true well-being. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. When babies are learning to walk, they fall and stumble 100 times, 1,000 times, and yet we accept that without judgment or criticism. Traditional Japanese philosophy teaches us to accept artistic imperfections and to see those as a cause for reverence. There's a stain on the patio at my house. We had a little accident with some oil when we were grilling. I can't get that stain out. But that stain is not the whole of life on the patio. It's not perfect, but it's okay. My father's almost 90. There are things about him that I wish were different. His memory, his cognition are at about 20% capacity. His skin is saggy, he has dark spots on his arms and his face, and they bother him. But he's my dad, and I love him. His imperfections have never changed that. Just like back in the days of in-person church, it's a little bit hard to make a transition from Kairos to the next thing. And we've just taken a 30,000-foot view of the idea of acceptance. But the hope of that kind of quiet time is to remind ourselves that we do know how to accept things, even things that are not our preference, like a stain on the patio or something far more serious. We do know how, and the peacefulness of that keeps us emotionally and spiritually healthy. I'm not too fond of separating those things out, emotional and spiritual and physical, but that's another topic. I know that you can think of many things in your life that are imperfect. You've made peace with them. Possibly you don't even think about them that much. It's useful to remind ourselves of this capacity that we have, because of course there will be things that are harder than others to accept, so we can flex our acceptance muscles a little bit to get ready. Benjamin Franklin told a funny story about Father Abraham refusing to accept a visitor who came to his tent. The visitor shows up. Father Abraham rushes out to meet him just like we would expect. They visit for a while. Abraham says, "So, do you worship the Most High God?" The visitor says, "No, I'm an idolater." Abraham kicks him and his camel off the land. That night, God came to Abraham and said, "Hey, Abraham, what happened to your visitor?" Abraham said, "Well, he told me he's not a true worshiper, and I got rid of him." God said, "I've been taking care of him for 198 years, and you can't have him here for one night?" Okay, so maybe you better fact check me on that. But maybe Father Abraham was confused. Maybe he thought that accepting meant agreeing or approving or waiving his rights or selling his soul. Just last week, I heard Estes Tucker say, you do have to be true to yourself. You're going to be faced with things that are not things you can agree with. But my question, and perhaps Dr. Tucker's too, I'm wondering if we can let go of just a few more things than we usually do. Be more accepting of them. You may not like it, you may not prefer it, you may feel sad or angry, but at some deeper level, maybe you could find peace with it as it is. Dr. Rick Hansen, New York Times author and a prolific writer of books, he talks about making peace with others is a gift to ourselves and to those around us. Sometimes with that attitude, we might be able to make things just a little bit better. He says you could practice this at home. Pick out someone in your life that you have a lot of contact with. Then say to yourself out loud, or maybe write it down, I accept you. You are a part of the larger whole of what is, and I accept that. I accept you. You are part of the larger whole of what is, and I accept that. When you get to that place, and it might take a bit of time, you've changed postures. You're no longer tangled up trying to will them or force them into change. And let's face it, tangled up is a good way to describe the feelings we have when we can't accept what is. But if accepting is not the same as agreeing or being scared to speak up, then maybe Dr. Hansen is right when he says that perhaps what we're doing when we avoid accepting people or situations is we're really avoiding the feelings that we are afraid of if we open up to something different. In other words, he's asking, does it feel a little bit scary having to open up, be more accepting to people or situations because it might call my own rightness into question? And if so, is that such a bad idea? Possibly, we are afraid of the feelings that we will have or the intellectual challenges that we might encounter if we become open. Maybe that was what was up with Archie Bunker or with Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. And those of you who watch lots of movies, I wish you'd send me your thoughts on modern movie characters who seem to demonstrate that they're unaccepting because they're afraid of the feelings they would have to deal with around that. So, as I worked on this message, in the final hours, I began to feel uneasy and doubtful. I was failing to accept the imperfection here. I thought the bookshelf was too messy. I don't even know if you can see it. I worried that I hadn't been emphatic enough in saying that I don't mean that accepting means being wishy-washy, or that you have to sell out your beliefs and your commitments, or that you have to cower in the face of opposing views. I was concerned about several things that had to do with imperfection. The imperfection of delivering this message or any message. But somehow, probably because I was under a deadline, but also because I want to take my own medicine. Somehow I came back to this. Learning to be accepting of the realities of our lives keeps us from the mental distress and illness that comes when we refuse to do so. There are many great tragedies in life that have at their root a refusal which possibly becomes an inability to accept what we don't like. Yes, sometimes imperfection is tragic, like when our bodies no longer work properly. And many of us, have faced that on some level. Throughout our lives, we have to bear the pain and the loss, and we have to bear death because of imperfection in this life. And yet somehow, surrounding us, though not fixing, there have been and still remain people who are in this boat with us, also accepting or needing to accept imperfection. And these people love us, and we love them, and it makes it all the more bearable. Imperfection is our reality, and hopefully we can continue to grow in accepting that without giving up on working for what we can change. But maybe we can do it without too much anger and anxiety. And then perhaps we will be able to avoid adding to the problems that already exist. You know what? We can embrace well-being. Well-being, as it turns out, can survive imperfection. I mean, it has for all of time. I mean, look at all of us. So let's don't give up. Maybe our prayer today is the serenity prayer. Grant that we might accept the things we can't change, work on the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.